Why didn't they evacuate the South Tower immediately? I know someone who was in the second tower. Irki said that there was a guy on his floor who was a retired Marine or some other ex-military, and he rounded them all up and got them out. Just completely took charge of the situation in a crisis and made the call. I think too often, people are waiting to be told what to do and go along with it even when they think it's not right, and it takes someone with experience and bravery to do the right thing. Edit. Since this is getting a lot of upvotes, I think it must have been Rick Rescorla, and he was even more of a hero than I realized. He died that day and saved so many people. He even anticipated the attacks before they happened and tried to get the company to move. Rick Rescorla, n.wikipedia.org wiki Rick Rescorla. The initial thought was that it was a small single-engine plane and not a commercial jet. Watching the first few minutes, I genuinely thought that certainly a few people died, but the NIFT will go up and put the fire out. My brother was in Tower 2. He said that there was fear that evacuating people could be hit by falling debris or, sadly, people. Even after the second plane hit, evacuees were funneled to different areas than what they considered the normal route. I am sharing a portion of an email my brother sent to me the next day. Text hidden because of triggering language. Exclamation as we reached the bottom of the building and were greeted by fireworkers that are now, I fear, dead. We were directed to the most indirect exit and told to follow the police commands. Upon leaving the WTC right by HSBC, we saw the worst things I've ever seen: mess, chaos, people crying, people dead, people separated from body parts, blood, woe and owner exclamation. There's a fantastic book called The Unthinkable about the scientific research on who survives disasters and why. It's one of those gripping books that will never leave you when you've finished it. There is a whole section on precisely this situation. The official safety protocol was to shelter in place. One legendary safety officer employed at Morgan Stanley was among the few that ignored the protocol. Ever since the '93 bombing at the towers, this dude relentlessly ran through drills with the staff about the importance of acting quickly and exiting the building. At the time of the attack, he led dozens of people from his office out of the tower and saved their lives. He was last seen running back up the stairs to help more people escape and died. What a fucking legend. No one knew a second plane was coming. A lot of people thought it was an accident before the second plane hit. But there were people watching that have structural engineering backgrounds that knew that tower would come down right after the first plane hit. Were there? Who? I'm curious how old you are and if you were old enough to remember when it happened. The answer to this is that this was a completely shocking and unprecedented event. Nobody had a plan for this type of emergency and nobody really even knew what was happening. It was too fast and chaotic. The reason that we have good emergency plans for anything is due to past disasters. Lots of people probably believe that sheltering in place in the second tower would be safer for them as well as prevent more chaos on the ground from getting help to the first tower. If you don't want to have nightmares, stop reading here. There was a young guy in the second tower who evacuated to the main floor where security did not allow him to leave because of falling debris. He was ordered to return to his desk and wait for instructions. The second plane hit below his floor. There is a horribly sad last call to his dad lamenting the fact he almost made it out, but listened to orders instead. Seriously, do not listen to that phone call. My uncle was there. They were telling everyone to stay put. I was also in NYC on that day in high school. Nobody could even begin to consider what was going on. Everyone was freaking out that a plane crashed into the Twin Towers, but until the second plane hit we thought it was just an accident. I once read that a manager at some company in the South Tower told people they would be fired if they left. Everybody should just keep working. A few people said okay, bye and left the building. The manager and the people who kept working died. This was according to one of the people that left. There were people watching that have structural engineering backgrounds that knew that tower would come down right after the first plane hit. I don't think this is true. When the first tower was hit, there was a lot of falling debris, and that was considered a bigger danger for people on the ground, which probably was a factor among others in why the South Tower wasn't evacuated right away. The NYC Fire Department generally has a policy of no one should leave buildings unless absolutely necessary. The fire guidance for apartment buildings, for example, is that in most situations if there's a fire in your building, you should stay in your apartment and wait for the fire department to come tell you what to do. This policy has a bunch of reasons, but one of them is that people leaving buildings get in the way of the fire department. Anyway, the fire department told everyone not to leave and that they'd be safer staying where they are. As a result, lots of people who were around that day now leave all buildings when there's any remote reason to and don't listen to the fire department. I was a kid in NYC on 911 and my family is like that now. My cousin was married at the time to a man who had been in the First World Trade Center bombing in '93. He was working in the second tower. He survived 9/11 because he took off the minute the first tower was hit. He didn't wait for anybody to give him any background on why the tower was hit. He just used his own experience to be safe. He is still alive today. He can usually be found on his yacht sailing around places near New York. My wife was working in the Ion Tower in Chicago at the time. It was called something else, but the tall white building next to the lake and very visible. The CEO of her company was sending emails for everyone to stay put. I was working from home that day. When the second plane hit, I was struggling to get in touch with my wife because phones were down and SMS was overloaded. I did manage to get a low-res photo of the first plane crash to her and the MSG to round everyone up and leave. She was saying they were struggling because the internet was not responsive and they were getting zero information on what was going on. That is what she did. Made the decision going against the CEO and telling everyone to evacuate. As they were near the bottom of the stairs tall building, the fire alarm was finally pressed. Fortunately, nothing happened in Chicago. But I lost all respect for her CEO that day. He eventually got done in by the Me Too movement. For you all born after 2000, remember, if you had a cell phone in 2001, I didn't, for instance, it was a dumb phone with no internet. Best it could do besides cell and SMS text was take shitty photos and shittier video. The cell towers were all jammed that day after the planes crashed, so no calls or texts go through. The internet wasn't like today with people shooting videos in real time and posting them on x.com/x.com or Reddit or Instagram, Facebook. You got news by watching TV or listening to the radio. Most newspapers were not online either, so if you got your news through them, you only heard about it in the evening edition. No live posting of current events. Most in the tower didn't know what was going on, only that it was an emergency. The building was likely on fire and it was bad. For high-rises, I believe the best practice for a fire is to stay on your floor until the fire department clears a stairwell. They had no idea an airplane just hit the tower. Just a loud boom and a bunch of alarms. Basically no real-time information. And for the firefighters, the only similar situation they've encountered was a light plane crashing into the Empire State Building. They were following the protocols for a building fire. I think it's one of those things that's obvious in hindsight. Also, I am not sure communication was super great on that day in general, being that this was a scenario no one envisioned happening ever. I had a business friend whose office was way up in the second tower, which I did not know until I emailed him after 9/11, and he wrote back about his escape. He said people turned back. No one believed there would be a second plane. Who would think that? The second plane hit after fewer than 20 minutes. It takes a long time to decide to walk down 80 or 90 flights of stairs, or maybe even to take the elevator, then actually do that. Many people were trying to get out but couldn't make it. Before each tower collapsed, there was debris and people falling all over the place. Father Mitchell Judge is the first official FDNY casualty. He was praying over a body outside the North Tower when something fell on him and killed him. And he was not the only person hit by falling objects. After the first plane hit, no one knew a second plane was coming, but they were certain that evacuating the South Tower would put those people in the path of everything falling from the North Tower, which might kill them, hence the recommendation to stay put. It's called normalcy bias. When the power goes out, your first thought isn't what if it doesn't come back on, it's wonder how long before it comes back. If there's a fire in your neighborhood, your first thought is I wonder how long before the fire is out. You never really ask yourself if the fire is going to spread and burn down the whole neighborhood. Your whole life has been normal, and even when a severe crisis happens, there is a psychological bias that we expect the damage to be contained and return to normal quickly. We very rarely expect things to spiral out of control, and as for structural engineers watching, structural engineering is a lot of very complicated math, and I guarantee you that for the engineers watching, modeling out how the towers, that they didn't know the construction of, would react to such novel stresses was the last thing on their mind. 9/11 archivist here. They had to prioritize the North Tower for obvious reasons, but also it was extremely unsafe out there. It was raining debris, burning pieces of God knows what just falling from the sky non-stop, and also people were jumping. It was hell out there. People were safer in the South Tower. Well, until the other plane hit anyway.